Welcome back to Ritual Hobby and Art. Today I'm on the trail at Big Ridge State Park. This is in eastern Tennessee near Maynardsville. It is along the Norris Lake. After the construction of Norris Dam in the 1930s by the TVA, they created Big Ridge to emphasize the recreational parts of Norris Lake. And so the park was set up with cottages and pool and different places for recreation, in addition to walking trails, which I'm on today. The lake trail, though not very long, it's about a 1.8 mile walk, goes around a small section of just one of the fingers of the lakes, but has very beautiful views, not only of the water, but through the woods. The old dam spans over a portion of this lake with great views to the south as well as to the north towards the ridge. And so this view is what our first painting will be of. For this painting, I'm using acrylic paints on acrylic paper that's taped down to a board. After determining where my sky, water, and ground would be, I went ahead and wetted down the top of the paper and started applying my sky color, which is usually a cerulean blue mixed with some white. The next thing I did was spend a bunch of time on the clouds, really working the clouds. Usually I do it with a round brush or a filbert type brush and just kind of using sort of circular motions, work that white pigment into the blue after the blue has dried, and really try to get those clouds out. And then adding a little dark, like a mixture of cerulean blue and white to the bottoms of them to make them sort of a shadow or like a darker color under the clouds. The next thing I worked on was the ridge in the background and some of these other land items on either side of the lake. And I wanted to use a layering technique, putting down one color first and putting different colors on top of that, all variations of green, using mainly sap green, but some other phthalo green and some oxide greens to just get different colors, because of course you don't have one type of tree. You're going to have many different types of tree. And so over a period of several seedings, I would work on the different greens to get that firmly down. The water itself was added with a very light cerulean blue to match that of the sky to start with. But then I wanted to add some waves, not waves, but sort of striations in the water, because it wouldn't be just a glass. Now, the original does show more of a glassy look, but it has a lot of dark tones, especially towards the foreground, and I found that difficult to replicate in this painting. After adding a lot more emphasis and detail to the banks on either side, as well as the far ridges, I also added darkening colors to the to the water near the banks. And on the left, you see I really put some really dark pieces in that I kind of regret, but there are dark areas on the original picture. Okay, so this picture is now finished. I've already signed it. A lot of things I did some more enhancing of the background, I do believe, at one point. I added some white in here. Not so much a reflection of what's back here, but trying to be a reflection of the sky based on some white patterns that were in the water before. I also added some white up here, and then using a razor blade, put scratches in the water, which is a common watercolor technique, but you could do it with acrylic too, and you're just basically showing maybe sort of some splashing or some rippling of the water, and so I did that. Rocks over here I added a little more detail to. Also put some scratches on this side of the bank and a little bit on this side of the bank as well, using again that razor blade. Otherwise, that's the final result. Back last October, I took a walk at the Melton Lake Greenway around Melton Hill Lake in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And so I did a painting of that, which I think came out very well for relaying what I saw that day as I walked the trail. Something else I enjoyed at Big Ridge State Park was the old mill trail, especially the Norton Grist Mill. This old grist mill had some interesting features, and amongst its landscape made for a nice painting subject. Before starting this painting, I tried some other paintings of some other venues to sort of prepare myself for this painting. First thing I did was I did a painting of this scene from Fort Loudoun State Historical Park near Vonore, Tennessee. This is a recreation of that park, of that fort, and so I wanted to do something focusing on this little house. This is actually a side of the house with an open door, with the sloping grass, the edges of the fort, the trees, the ridge in the background, and the water, and then this other house to the left. So what I'm doing here is I'm using my brush with water on the end, squeezing out the excess to lift out or remove some of the color from the page. This is gouache paint that I'm working with, so it's watercolor based, and using that to kind of emphasize the shingles. Now, the grist mill will be painted in acrylic, so I wouldn't be able to do that as much, but it's more of just trying the technique out to see how the shutters will look, because I will be doing a roof on the grist mill. This is a watercolor painting I did from a lesson by Matthew Palmer on his website, Watercolor TV. He gives you the sketch, and you transfer that to your paper, and then he gives you instructions step by step on how to do this. And so I did that. I'm a member of Watercolor TV, and so I did this one specifically to work on that wheel and work on the what they call in England a watermill. It's pretty much still the same concept of a water wheel used for doing some sort of mechanical work inside the building. And so the grist mill is the same thing. This painting also involved a bridge, and that again works into another painting I worked on that I'll show you next. This is from the Third Creek Greenway here in Knoxville. This is a old railroad bridge, and we happened to have a train passing over at that moment. And so I did a painting based on this scene, and you'll see how it came out. First and most important part is I drew it out ahead of time, not only the bridge, but the train cars, and tried to put them into perspective with sort of a vanishing point way off to the left. After that, it was just a matter of adding color for the dark colors of the bridge, adding color for the light colors of the train cars, the box cars, and then just adding in the grass and more of the sky, and details such as shadowing on the train cars, graffiti on the train cars, and shadows on the bridge. Let's go ahead and return back to Big Ridge State Park to the grist mill and the final painting of this video. You see the grist mill in the center of the picture with a lot of trees behind it, 2 trees in the foreground, and a little stream to the right. First thing I did was I drew the grist mill, not only its details, but where it was in the scene. And so with the foliage and trees behind it and the ground in front of it and the little stream. I should note that after I drew the building, I also put masking fluid over the edges of the building on the left, the top, and the right, and especially around those 3 posts to the right of the wheel. And the reason for doing this was so that any of the background colors would not affect the foreground colors and scheme of the building wheel and the post house there. And so, because there's a tree that's going in there, that will cover some of it, but I wanted to be able to enhance those posts for what's behind them. And same with the building, that whatever was in the foreground would not be damaged by the green, because this one is being done in acrylic. Even if it was done in watercolor, I would still use masking fluid for this. After adding the initial greenery in the back, I layered more greenery on top, using just the edges of brushes, as well as a sort of a tree and texture brush. And then I put some darkening under the house or under the building. So at this point, there's a lot of color that's been added to the grist mill building, to the wheel, and to the area behind where those 3 posts are. At this point, things are getting pretty serious. I've put the 2 trees in the foreground. I've added what will be the beginning of the tree to the right of the building that will cover up some of that side. And I've added the beginning colors of the creek itself, which is kind of a brown color. And we'll see how that goes. Using the Matthew Palmer tree and texture brush, I'm applying a little more color to this tree to the right of the building, especially over the wheel. This tree and texture brush helps to kind of stipulate that color out. It looks a little more like leaves and less like a blob. Here I'm adding a little more color, a different kind of color to that same area, just doing that layering technique. I'm going to introduce some Indian yellow to this tree to the left to sort of provide the leaves that are at the mid part of these 2 trunks. So on these trees on the left, I realized they're white, so I had to put a little more white than brown in them. And then on the creek, I added some more definition to it to make it more of like a body of water. All right, so at this point, I've added some definition to these 2 trunks, and I put the tree, or the actual branches, over top the Indian yellow color that I was working with earlier. On the other side, I've given color to some of these boulders to make them stand out a little better, worked on some of the reflection of the items here. I need to do a little more with this wheel. It doesn't show up as like you'd think you'd see more of the wheel in here, and in the original it doesn't look that way, and so I may not cover that. But the area that does need more work is the grass. Grass in the ground needs a little more definition, especially with how it relates to the soil over here and the soil over here, and then how it interacts with the bank here. The original picture does have a bench right here, and I'm not including that because I don't care. It's just I felt starting this that I didn't want to have a bench right there, and so I wanted just the trees and the grist mill, the creek, and the scenery behind it. And that's the nice thing about doing paintings is you can include what you want and what you don't want. So a lot of times I would say at this point, this picture is finished. But as I said, I need to work on the ground. I don't want to do a lot more to the grist mill or the trees because I'm not saying that I'll make it worse, but I think a lot of fidgeting with a painting sometimes just isn't necessary, at least for my hobby painting that I'm doing here. Okay, at this point we're about finished. I'll give you one more look at the original photograph. So at this point, I'm pretty much finished. The last holdout was working on this part of the ground. I had made this area a little darker than this, but if you remember, originally they were both very light green. It is autumn, so I made this a little darker because this area is also in shadow, and that caused a lot of problems because this became much darker than this. So I had to kind of do some work here to compensate. And in the glare there, you may not see it as well. If I hold it up this way, it may be a little more obvious. A lot of times when you're doing these kind of paintings, or any painting, the painting kind of takes on a sort of goes in a direction of its own. And whether good or bad, it can actually make the painting fun. That's what I find. I find my most enjoyment is when the painting kind of goes in its own direction and you're working for the painting rather than for maybe your original intent. That's where you can get a lot more joy out of the painting. And so that's kind of what happened here. I still like the overall look of the painting. I'm still going to put it up on the wall. And but it goes back to what I talked about in part one, Painting the Trail part one, about you might end up painting what your mind's eye remembers rather than what the scene actually dictates. So I think that's it for now. The Norton Grist Mill at Big Ridge State Park. And I'll see you next time on the trail.